There's a frustration that every coach has felt, and it's usually some version of, "Hey, how are we working on this again? We literally just covered it last week. We drilled it. They had it, and now it's like they've never even seen this concept before in their lives." If that's ever come out of your mouth, then I think this is for you, because here's the thing: your players forgetting what you taught them is not a sign that you necessarily taught it badly. Maybe partially, depends, or even that they weren't paying attention, or that your players are lazy, because forgetting is not a flaw in your players. Forgetting is just a part of being human. And I forget things every single day. Every brain does it. And not only that, we don't do it on purpose. We do it automatically, predictably, almost on a schedule, it feels. But the good news is that because forgetting is predictable, it's also something that we can fight against. There's a whole science to making things stick. I'll go through that throughout this lesson, but this entire lesson is just about retrieval practice, why your players forget, how to fight it. It's about understanding why that forgetting happens in the first place. And the biggest tool to beating that is this thing called retrieval practice. So let's get into it. This one is about memory, making sure that the things that you actually taught are actually going to stay, because um, just because you thought you taught something well doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily stick. This right here is something called the forgetting curve. I show it to my classes all the time in regards to studying for a test, a quiz, anything like that. But it's very applicable for us as coaches too. The first time I saw it, now I can't unsee it every single time I coach. And here's what it shows: the moment right after you teach a player something, a concept, a read, a rule, whatever, their memory of it is at its peak. So on this left side right here, the y axis, if you will, is the memory up to 100% all the way down to zero. And then on the right axis, or the x axis, if you will, is the time remembered in days. And what we see is that moment that you teach them is at its peak, and they've got it. But then you see what happens next. Almost immediately, if you look at that pink line, um, the memory starts to drop. And it doesn't drop slowly, but it falls off of a cliff. And, this can vary between different players, but everybody has it occur. And within a day, a big chunk of it's already gone. So you look at one day, and then 2 days, and then all the way to 5 or 6. If that is never used again, or it's never revisited again, most of it is going to evaporate, and they're going to forget pretty much everything. The curve plunges near the bottom, and it's not a curve for your bad players, your or bad students or whatever. Every human brain goes through this, because it's just how basic memory works. Your most attentive, coachable, hardest working players are forgetting just as much as everybody else is, because it's automatic. So sit with what that means for your coaching. So when you teach something on, let's say, a Monday, it's gone by Thursday. That doesn't necessarily mean that you failed, but that forgetting was always going to be coming. And so these other lines next to it, the green lines, the blue lines right here, is the next moment of repetition, the next time they encounter whatever that is. Not necessarily like, here's the first rep, second rep, third rep, and all of that occurs at the same time. But every time that we reintroduce that concept. So the mistake isn't in the teaching all the time. The mistake is thinking that the teaching was the finish line, where you install a concept, and when you install it, it's at the top of the curve, and without something to interrupt that fall, it slides right back down, and you forget. So the real question of really this whole thing is, how do you interrupt this curve? How do you stop the fall? That is where retrieval practice comes in. Let's take a look at this. So this is the tool for fighting that forgetting curve. If you go back to this, to stop that forgetfulness from happening and to improve and increase memory, is something called retrieval practice. And the definition is pretty simple. It basically just means you are making your players pull a skill or a concept or something back out of their own memory, where they are having to actively recall it. Not just you necessarily telling them it again, but they are trying to actively recall it. So it's the difference between reteaching and them re-remembering. And this distinction, I think, is everything. So let me make it a little bit concrete. Let's say your players are fuzzy on how you want them to rotate on defense, whatever that looks like for your team. you have a few options. Option one, you could stop practicing, you can re-explain it, you walk them through it again, you demonstrate, they watch, they nod, sounds good, coach. Or option two, you stop practice and ask, we're in this situation. Who is responsible for this rotation here? Show me. And you make them dig it out of their own heads. Option one feels efficient, and perhaps sometimes there's a time or a place for it. Maybe they literally just didn't get it at all the first time. Um, but option one is you doing the cognitive work, not them. Option two is them. And that's the whole point, because here's the principle that makes retrieval so powerful, in my opinion. Every single time a player pulls a memory back out, that memory gets stronger. So then, whenever you go back to this forgetting curve, their memory improves through it. And we've seen that happen time and time again, and science backs it up. The struggle to remember is the rep that builds the memory. And yes, it's hard. It's going to be harder for them. They will struggle. They'll pause. They might get it wrong. That struggle is not a problem, because they need the struggle to remember. Just like our performance versus learning, anything like that. Teaching happens in this moment. You call it the stoppage. Learning happens when the player has to retrieve things by themselves. So the best time to review is when they're about to forget. The best time to go back is the moment when it looks like they're going to forget it. Maybe it's the same practice. You do something at the beginning of practice, and maybe 45 minutes later, you think that they just forgot a play or a new concept for them. The best time to review it is when they're about to forget, because it runs against every single coaching instinct, the timing of the retrieval. Your instinct when you teach something important is to hammer it right away, teach it, then immediately review it, 5, 10 times in a row while it's fresh, to really lock it in. That feels like the responsible thing to do. It does. But the forgetting curve tells us something surprising, in that reviewing something you just learned does very little. You need to have that, edge right between where they're about to forget versus when you taught something. So that power comes from recalling it right as it's slipping away. Pulling it out when it's already fresh in mind doesn't really do much at all for you. It comes from recalling something right when you think that they're going to forget it. And that's a little dance. The best time to remember something, and this is in my notes, the best time to remember something is when you've begun to forget it. Write that down, read that again. The moment something's just gonna start to fade is the ideal moment to recall it. So practically, this flips our review strategy. Don't drill a concept 10 times in one day and call it learned. I think it's better to touch it today, let a little time pass. You can maybe review it a little bit further on into practice, but then bring it up again. You're catching it on the way down the curve over and over, and each catch resets it higher and makes the next fall of that graph a little bit slower. So here is how, let's make it practical a little bit, because I think practice is about memory, not just reps. That's what we've been talking about throughout this whole thing. Here are 4 different concrete ways to build retrieval into your actual practices. And I don't know if my face is covering the bottom one, but I'll walk through all of these. First, space it out. I think this is the basic one. This is the big one. Instead of cramming a concept into one long block on one day, spread it across days and even weeks. I know you want to get into your entire defensive system and defensive philosophy, but if you throw too much right away, they're going to forget all of it. Okay. There's some different research on this that captures this perfectly. And if you basically spread 15 minutes of well-designed retrieval across 3 days, rather than 45 minutes total straight, that will dramatically beat anything that you can do. Spread it out into short bursts rather than cram it all into one session. Heck, you can even have it where it's less total time, but you space it out. Spacing it out wins. Second, circle back within a single practice. I do this a lot where, if we want to go over and install something, we will do it at the beginning of practice. I will maybe bring it up somewhere in the middle of practice where I think they're about to forget it. And then I will circle back at the end. You can do it 2 or 3 times within a practice. It depends on how long your practice is. Whatever it is, maybe it's a spacing concept. Okay. I want my players to arrive in this spacing and transition. And heck, they're going to forget about it 30 minutes later. So we're going to bring it back up, but we're only going to touch on it for another 5 minutes so that they have to retrieve some of those things. Deliberately bring those things back later in the same practice. I think that could be very beneficial for you. Third, ask, don't tell. This connects straight to, cues, feedback work, all that. Ask more questions. Don't just tell them the answers. And this is kind of the heart of being a teacher. Ask them, make them retrieve things. When you are doing the asking and they have to answer it, it does way more work than you just telling them the answer. Turn it into a question. Heck, you could even make it a quiz of sorts, divide it into teams. That gets me into the fourth one. Use low stake tests, um, quizzes, tests. I use, if you've ever seen Family Feud, I do that every once in a while to make it fun a little bit. Competitive recall where the stakes are low enough to stay fun, but you still want them to have to compete for that knowledge, I think is so important. So, um, mindset shift underneath all of this. Practice isn't only about reps, but it's about memory. And these are just four tools in which you can utilize that. I'm almost done here. Uh, I think here's the biggest insight to carry out of this lesson. You haven't taught it until they can pull it back out on their own. Not, hey, I explained it. Not, they watched me show it. Not, they nodded, said, got it, coach. None of that is actual learning. They didn't learn it until they can pull it back out on their own and show you that they learned it. That's it. Hearing isn't learning. Watching you isn't learning. Learning is what survives after they've forgotten. So you're going to have to continue to reframe your whole job around that durability of memory.